So this is Haunt of Fear number 24. Nice cover by Jack Ingalls. And this is my first EC Golden Age book in my collection. Really love it, love it. Nice little entry point for Golden Age. And then you got the 2.0 on there. And then for the notes, it says that it was used in the U.S. Senate investigative report. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. And that's a nice cover too by Jack Ingalls. You got like this slop monster down there with the eyeballs. So that's going to be the part of the story that we're going to be covering later on. But I want to talk about like what they said about this book in the Senate before we get started. But just kind of, for those of you guys unfamiliar, back in the 1950s was like this big witch hunt on comic books, because everyone was saying that comic books were, you know, were contributing to juvenile delinquency, which was like a hot topic back in those days. Which 50s is a weird time. You have a few things going on at this time too as well. You had this psychology, I forget his name, Wiener, whatever. He wrote The Seduction of the Innocent, which is a pretty, it was the first book that its main focus was literally the effect of comic books on children, on the juvenile delinquency, and people just ate this shit up. First of all, when this guy published some stuff, I think one of the first things that where it was published, it wasn't published like in a journal, peer-reviewed journal, scientific psychology journal. It was actually like in a housewife magazine or something, which it kind of tells you that it was kind of aimed a little bit more for sensationalism, and people just ate this shit up, you know, like even the Senate got involved, and that's where we came with this trial for the comic books on April 21st, 1954, which is my brother's birthday, by the way, shout out. And they decided, we're gonna put these comic books on trial to see if this is what's causing juvenile delinquency, right? Never mind that, you know, poverty might be causing to juvenile delinquency, maybe racism, maybe it's because of the war that was just over. And this is 1954, so you got a lot of kids that were growing up out of the war. Maybe you had a lot of like orphans coming out of the war. You know what I mean? Like, it could have been any of those, but no, the government said it's gonna be comic books, right? And in a way, things don't change, right? Some things never change. You can still see it today. Anytime we have a tragedy, you know, you guys remember the Columbine shooting, Marilyn Manson, or they blame Eminem or Grand Theft Auto, San Andreas and stuff. It's always something different, and it always feels like they're always looking for something to blame except the actual problem itself. So I think it's in a way to kind of cope with it. It makes an easy target, and I think for comic books at this time were kind of an easy target, because I've been surprised to see kind of like the reactions from some of the creators at the time. It's kind of like they were blindsided almost. Like these guys were just in their own world creating stuff, and they were just kind of happy to be able to make a living from these comic books and kind of express themselves freely and stuff. And then here comes this Wiener psychologist guy who was just kind of like bashing them and stuff like that. And it surprised me, the reaction, because because I feel like a lot, like the modern reaction to somebody bashing your craft would be like to get defensive and kind of dig in. But what I thought was kind of interesting was that some of these guys actually felt really bad, and they felt ashamed of what they were doing. And a lot of them just decided to quit, and they were just kind of like, they didn't dig in defensively. And because, you know, I feel like this was a different time when people actually believed in government maybe a little bit more. So yeah, I think a lot of people were kind of blindsided by that. So I'm going to be reading you guys what was said about this particular book in the Senate. This was actually mentioned on the opening day, because again, it was only supposed to be 2 days, but I guess the senators were having such a great time bashing on these guys that we're going to do it for a third. Yeah? So there was this guy, right? So on the first day, it was just kind of the senators, and the way they started off is because they started presenting their argument, right? And there was this gentleman called, what's his name? Richard Clenenden, executive director, right? So this guy was, you know, hired by the Senate to actually investigate juvenile delinquency. So the Senate said, hey, we got juvenile delinquency going on. It's kind of surging. It's like, we need you to find out what it was. And this is what he came back with. He came back with comic books. He came back with an easy target. I felt like he kind of just read the psychologist's Seduction of the Innocent, and he was like, you know what, I'm going with this. I need to turn something into the senators so I can, you know, keep my job. Honestly, that's kind of how it kind of felt a little bit, in my opinion. I don't know if those were his intentions or not, but he actually had a background in juvenile delinquency. He worked in institutions for emotionally disturbed children and delinquent children. He was also a probation officer. So he had the resume for it, right? Again, but I feel like he ended up just going for the low-hanging fruit instead of actually tackling what the real issues were. So we're going to be talking about, he kind of goes in and he starts presenting his argument of why he thinks, and he starts pulling examples. He uses black magic, as one of his examples and stuff like that. But what he said particularly about Haunt of Fear 24, this is what he said. In the next comic, Haunt of Fear has 4 stories in which 8 people die violently. One story, entitled Headroom, has to do with a spinster who operates a cheap waterfront hotel. The renter of one of the rooms is a man that she would like to marry. To win his favor, she reduces his rent by letting his room during daytime hours to an ugly and vicious appearing man. This shot shows her renting the room to the individual. Meanwhile, there are daily reports that the murderer is loose in the city who cuts off and carries away his victim's head. The hotel keeper suspects that the vicious appearing daytime roomer and searches this room, where she discovers 6 heads hanging on the hooks in the closet. She is discovered there by her favorite roomer, who is returning to the hotel for the night. It develops that he is the murderer, and in the next picture shows the hotel keeper's head being added to the closet collection. So that is what was said in the comic book about Haunt of Fear. And that is, I think, one of the stories and stuff like that. But again, very, very short, and there was just kind of like, as a matter of fact, I think one thing that we don't really get a lot of times from these critiques of these comic books was actually the sense of humor that some of these books had, the subtle sense of humor, the sense of irony that some of these books had, and also like some of the underlying like messages and like saying, you know, if you behave like this, bad things are going to happen to you and stuff like that. And they also had like this kind of assumption that children are idiots and one-dimensional. I think people really underestimate how much children can actually understand the difference between right or wrong. And I don't think that it's literature itself that's going to change that, or any specific books or anything, but whatever. Anyways, this whole, you know, witch hunt for comic books, like it goes on and on. I think this whole witch hunt for comic books was very interesting. It came at an interesting time, I think, because if you think of the 50s, some people think of like white picket fences and the nucleus family and television sets and microwave sets and, you know, prosperity. But then if you ask other people, 50s sounds more like hatred, because remember, people weren't afforded civil rights until 1964. So 10 years later, there was a lot of racial tension during the 50s and a lot of activism and stuff like that. And that's something that people don't sometimes doesn't take into account when you think about the 50s. And I think that there was this kind of attitude in the 50s with like mainstream America to try to put up a front that, oh, this is a perfect country, everything's good, look how prosperous we are, you know, and try to be pious and all that nonsense and stuff. And I think that comic books kind of struck a nerve, because comic books were so popular at the time, especially horror books. They were like all the rage. And I felt like they kind of struck a nerve with the mainstream America, because they talked about some of the stuff that that still happened in homes. Like, for example, this story that we're going to be talking about today had domestic violence, and it also had alcoholism. And I felt like that made some of these things were kind of a reflection of what was going on in society. Again, these were like stories and they were exaggerated, but I felt like it might have struck a nerve with like saying, hey, there's some ugly stuff that also goes on in America as well. And I felt like that it kind of struck a nerve with people. Like, oh, we have to make people Christian and stuff like that. It's these comic books that are making people like that. But we know better than that. I think as far as like society's problems are a lot deeper than that. And but again, this was a witch hunt that nearly killed comic books and stuff. And superhero, by the way, superhero comic books were like the psychologist guy, he didn't like them either. He said that they were like homoerotic and I think communistic or whatever, fascist or whatever. Like, I don't know. That guy was reaching for straws, guy. The guy was a fucking square. He was a freaking Karen in the 1950s. And also, you got to remember, in the 1950s, there was literally, McCarthyism was literally going on as far as like people were chasing down, you know, communists and stuff. So I feel like this was a way for people to not actually address what the real ugly thing that was going on in America, which was discrimination. I feel like that was kind of the people's way to kind of like, you know, look over there, you know. Anyways, let's take a look at this story and find out what kind of ugly, nasty filth was inside of these pages. All right.